Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We are on page 1324. Top of 1324. Okay, so we began a discussion of Shem. Remember, Shem is the operative force that is mevar Shem ban. Man is gematria, Ma is gematria Adam, and ban is gematria behema. Like we learned at the bottom of page 1323. So where's Ma rooted? So I gave yesterday a long introduction, relatively, from volume 1, mostly from volume 1, that it's rooted in, like he said, Hayetze memitzcha da'ak, that man originates and is derived from and essentially exits from metzach of ak. Now it's important, again, I'm just repeating because these terms are relatively new for many people, and they are always using physical metaphors. So that's why the Baal Shem Tov made a big point that when you learn Kabbalah, in Kabbalistic terms, you have to be mafshit, lahafshita megash miyusam. We have to learn to abstract them from their physical terminology. Basically, the concept of anthropomorphism, which does not apply to God, or godly entities and godly features. But since the human being was created in the image of God, Tselem Elokim, and Dibra Torah B'Loshem B'nei Adam, and the Torah speaks in the language of a human being, like it says, God's eyes, God saw, God heard, God got angry. You have expressions even in Chumash filled with talking about God in human, seemingly human terms. So that's why it's a rule and an axiom that as soon as you hear those terms, you have to immediately apply the rule that Torah is speaking in the language of the human being. And it's metaphorical, essentially, because we're dealing with spiritual levels. There's also the concept that Torah medaberes b'elyenim uramezes b'tachtein. Torah is speaking about things b'elyenim on more spiritual, ethereal, and sublime levels, and meramezes b'tachtein, and it hints to, alludes to things down below, not as some say that it speaks about things below and alludes to things above. Just as a short critical axiom that you always have to apply. So the same thing, especially when it comes in Kabbalah, where terms like this are used: metzach, oizen, chetem, peh, ear, nose, mouth, things like yichudim, zivugim, talking about unions, which again, if you don't abstract it, it can come across very coarse and very literal, and it's not meant to be that way. Just like Shir Hashirim talks literally about like a romantic story between a man and a woman, but in truth, it's really the story between the Eibishter and the Knesset Yisrael, Akash Baruch and Knesset Yisrael. This doesn't mean it cannot manifest also in physical terms. Adam and Chava did exist, and they were also intimate physically, but the intimacy begins and is rooted on deeper spiritual levels. So getting back to this, so Shem Ma Hayetze Memitzcha Da'ak, and he says that's, for example, the reflection, the glow on the face and on the forehead. So you see a glowing face, and especially the forehead, as we learned earlier, the forehead plays a particular role, even more than the cheeks or other parts of the face, that is essentially a reflection of atzmius, pnimius atzmius hanefesh, which on one hand is coming from a very deep place, but it's coming in a way that we can't relate to. You can't explain it. It's not in any way internalized. That's why it's through hefsek hametzach va'aponim. There's a hefsek, there's like a so-called partition, which is called the actual forehead and the face. And that is Shem Ma, which is rooted in Atzmus of Adam Kadman, of Ein Sof, which he says is the name Ab. Ayin Beis, the highest of the 4 names in Ak. Rak Sheba b'derech Bikiya. Bikiya means like piercing through. When you say something, Bikiya means it's a very powerful light that just breaks through any barriers. So it's really very powerful. What breaks through it, we have on the other side, is only, like he says, the Hainu, Shemisala Ma'ir. That's Bikiya. Sometimes we use the word Bikiya back in volume 1 on the Kav, that the Kav Bokas at Tzimtzum. It pierced the Tzimtzum. So on one hand, it's coming from power, a power that has the power to even pierce the great Simsum, and at the same time it's only a kav. She says that's not a ha'ara levad in this case that we're talking. Ki'im ha'etzem shemisalim k'maishu be'etzem. So it's not like the etzem went through, became a reflection, a reflection, a reflection. It's the etzem, and basically God created a reality. He wanted us to be able to see the etzem in some way, so we see it on the glow of the forehead, or the glow of the face of the king, like he said, Oris Pnei Chaim. You see, we say Yor Panav Havaya when we say in Bechas Koyanim, speak about the face of God glowing, radiating, or like he spoke about on page 1321, that when they see the glowing face of the Be'er Panav Yehalechun. So this also explains all the verses where you hear the verse that God's face is glowing. Be'er Panav Yehalechun. Be'er Pnei Melachayim, there's an expression. Ashem Yeh, what does he say? But that's the Ashem Yeh Deit Suru. Be'er Pnei HaMelech, Kad Anpud the Malkan Nehirin. I'm just reading different terms he used on that page. So technically what's happening here, that Atik, even though Atik is fundamentally a removed entity, like we said, it's completely removed. That's why it's called Atik, Netag Nivdal. But again, in the context of an interface, somewhere Atik is expressed, and where is it expressed? On the forehead. That's essentially what we said before, Chesed of Atik. The Oyer coming from Atik is something that we see on the Metzach. And this I referred to earlier when we began this topic on page 12. We started the whole Zohar. There was that. Let's go back, pretty far back. Right here, yeah. On page 1237 and on, we spoke about Abba v'im mistaklin b'mitzcha da'are champin, which he ultimately explained is really going all the way to Atik. That from there come the 370 lights. If you remember, all that is all related to what we're discussing now. So that's where Shema, the Shema of Atzilus, is emerging from in Ak. And that's how it emerges. So essentially you can say, if I were to sum it up before we continue reading, that there are, in this context, three ways of revelation. One is Eiris and Kalim. Like when you say the power of Seichel in the mind, or the power of vision in the eye. Just the pure faculty. That's Eiris and Kalim. That is the structure of Tikkun of Atzilus. Then there is a revelation from a deeper part of the person, which is more than just faculties, where the eyes, the ears, and the nostrils access, their cavities access deeper parts of the person. Like we know, for example, the optic, what is it called? The olfactory nerve of the nose, they say, is the one that goes straight to the brain with the least amount of partition, so to speak. And the same thing with the ears and the same thing with the eyes. So as he explained back in volume 1, this gives us a revelation what's coming from a deeper part of the person, say like the eyes are the window of the soul. I'm not talking about the power of vision now. When you look at a person's eyes, you can see something deeper. When we hear things, we can hear certain sounds, we hear deeper experiences. And the same thing with the nostrils, a smell, an aroma is v'chayed the nefesh. We know that it's machzir nafshe. When we say psamim, it's like smelling salts that can arouse someone who's in a coma because it reaches a deeper part of the soul. And then there's a third level, the highest, is the one, the metzach, the forehead. There's no cavity, there's no opening, but the glow reflects the highest level of all, which is what we're talking about now. So again, in the context of an interface, it's a critical step because it helps us experience something higher. Now, of course, this is going to lead to explaining how Mamaila Lamata, the Shema, has the power to transform it from simply because it's coming from such an intense higher place. But he's going to spell that out. So I'll wait till the Rebbe Rashab says it, but that's what he's leading to. So I'm going to continue reading now on top of page 1324 from the third line in his Shem. So this is all quoting the Maimarim that he cited at the bottom last page. Chukas Hatera, the third Maimar, and the Drushim Sha'achreza, which goes back all the way to volume 1 to page, he says 536. I would say a little earlier I think I said 533. Tov Kuf Lamed Gimel. Let me just look. I think, yeah, Tov Kuf Lamed Gimel is where the actual subject begins. Maybe Tov Kuf Lamed Vav is more connected to this point. Yeah, Kol Inyan Atikun Eris is Shema that comes from Metzel Da'ak. Page, it's 533 is where the subject begins if you want to look it up in volume 1. Okay. So we'll continue now from the top, third line.
Before you start, can I just ask you, did you say Ban comes from Metzach this morning, or did I hear it wrong? Or is it?
No, Ma comes from Metzach.
Yes, what I thought, but I thought I heard Ban. Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. Ban comes from, as he explains there, from Sag, that comes from the Oizen Chet and Peh, the ears, the nose, and the mouth, as he explains. Okay. Yeah. From this Boyer Shem, and it was explained there. Where's there? Those Maimorim I just referred to, 533 and on. The Mishum Zeh, that because of this, that what? That Shema is coming from the Metzach, which is like a piercing of a higher level, just piercing through, breaking through. Like the example he gives there is the beads of wine on the outside of a barrel of wine that's completely filled from corner to corner, completely packed. So there are beads of sweat or beads of wine that you see on the outside. It's coming through the intensity. That's called a bikia. So he says, because of this, that Ma has this paradoxical quality that on one hand it's coming from an atzmizdika place, but it's coming in an eifin shemisalim, meaning in a concealed form. We see the glow, but we don't see anything else. So due to that, Yesh chiluki madreges b'shem masha be'elamus. There are many levels, a multitude of levels in the Shema that travels through Elamus. Remember, these names are essentially energy. Shema is Yud Ke Vav Ke. As the Yud is written out, Yud Vav Dalet, the Hey is Hey Aleph, Vav Aleph Vav, and Hey Aleph adds up to 45. So Shema is the name we use. So it's a flow of energy. And this flow is in all the world. As a matter of fact, I referred yesterday to another page where this idea is brought. And he brings this idea as well on page 1272, that there's levels. He says exactly the same. Yes, bezeh chilukim adreges. Yashema yetzim mitzcha, shabo b'derech bikia atzmi. And mishum ze yesh chilukim adreges. Almost the same words. So the Shema in Atzilus, the Shema in Bria. Okay. So this Shema, I want to add something. I'll add it after I can explain. Is yesh chilukim b'Shema she'elamus. The begin the Shema yesh b'chol ha'elamus, because Shema is in all the worlds. Just like Havaya is in all the worlds. It's an energy flow that exists in all the worlds. And they're all connected with one thing. No matter what level it's on, it's all reflecting Atzmi. It's all coming from this Metzach of Ak, the forehead of Ak, which is reflecting something Atzmizdik. Like I explained yesterday, is the bittul of Ma that allows it to be that way. And yet, you cannot compare, or it's not similar, I should say, the level of Ma'az that's not, and the level of Ma'az that's in Bria. Ad b'chinas Ma da'asiyah. All the way to the Shem Ma as it is in Asiyah. Why is that the case? If Shem Ma would be an Atzmi is an Atzmi. Everywhere, it's equal. Etzem built in Mishtana, there's an expression. An Etzem doesn't change. The fact that there's in different worlds is because it's an Atzmi that's Misalim. It's concealed. But let's explain, it's not the conventional word that we use for concealment. Like he said, often concealment means like a tzimtzum. You diminish it, you conceal it, you cover it up. It's only a reflection. He says that here on top that he's not referring to Misalim in that way. So, and on page 1272, he actually spelled it out even more. He said, it's not that the earth is going through, is being concealed and covered. He actually says, which is probably here, what we're learning now on page 1272. What does it mean? It means that when you say Misalim, not that something is concealing it, but rather that it's not, it's just, you're just getting this outer expression. It's like the forehead is glowing with the inner atzmizdika light, but it's Misalim because the etzem as it is just expressing itself. So it's not a tzimtzum to the etzem, it's something in between. And it's important to make that emphasis because you want to have atzmi here, but in the form of Misalim. And that's why there's the differences between one world and the next. If what was radiating the Shem Mama, the way it is Begili Mamish, then the bittel of Shema, then what would have happened if that Atzmiz Dika'er would be shining in a fully revealed way, it would descend and enter into the creatures through and through, in all the parts of their very matter, of their very body, of their very being. And they would feel within themselves the Atzmus of Ein Sof, the core of the infinite, also in their physical and coarse bodies. And that in turn would have caused them to completely be nullified. One second. Like when we say kol atzmaisei teimanna, with all my bones, with all my etzem, teimanna, I call out and speak to God with all my etzem. Ukamesha kosav Shem, and he continues referring to those maimarim, like he writes there, b'dibra maslas karboni lachmi, in the maimars karboni lachmi, which is further down in the continuation of those discourses in volume 1. Below they say page 556. And that's where we end this sentence. So what did he add now? He added like this, that Shema has a Gili Atzmi, but it's in a form that's very much concealed. Not concealed as in a tzimtzum, as a reflection. It's the Atzmi itself. It would be like where we have the gift that God is showing us his face. So when we see the face, we see the glow. On one hand, it's coming from the etzem. On the other hand, it's misalim, because what else can you see? It's not really begili. All you see is the glow. You don't see what he really is about. You don't see his personality. You don't see what's going on, so-called behind the mesach, behind the forehead. But because of that, that's why we can also exist. Like when Hashem says to Moshe, if anyone sees me, you cannot see me and live. Exactly. Because if it was Begili Mamish, and let's put it this way, there was no metzach, there was no forehead, it would be like the glow. Like when Moshe Rabbeinu came down second time from the mountain, he had to cover his face because the glow would blind them. If the glow would come without the metzach, without the shield of a metzach, it would blind us completely. So just to give an example, you look at the sun. So there's two ways you could look at the sun and not be affected, not be blinded. One is the sun goes through a bunch of concealments. First of all, the sun travels here, it's hundreds of thousands of miles. So of course the light gets diminished. If we were closer to the sun, it wouldn't be that way. It would burn us up and blind us. Secondly, we have all kinds of ways to diminish that light. It could be through curtains or shades or whatever it may be. That is all the first type of helam. There's a true concealment. The light has become diminished. But then there's another way. You can look at the sun in its full brilliance, and what you have is not a curtain, but what you're seeing is only the glow. You're not seeing the etzem itself. Now let's see if there's a physical example for that. maybe if you look at the sun and you wear one of those, like it would by an eclipse, but that would be like shades. Shades, maybe a shade would be the right way because you have the actual light, but no, it wouldn't be because the shade causes a tzimtzum, a concealment. I don't know if there's an example with the sun, to be honest. But for example, but the face of Pnei Melachayim, face of God, or the face of a great teacher, and the glow is there, so you see the glow. So the atzmi is there, but it's in a way that we only see the outer expression of it, like the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. Tip of the iceberg is not a concealment; it's just the tip. That's called pekia. And because of that, number one, existence could exist and not get burned up or blinded by this light, by this atzmizdika light. And that's also why there are levels of Shema and Atzilus, Shema and Bria. Because if you could say it's Atzmi, why there are levels? The answer is because it's an Atzmi that's Misalim. And there are levels, level after level. That's essentially what he's saying here, which is summing up what we learned back in those pages. Yeah, on page 1272, he elaborated also a bit more about this. He says that's why there are levels. Each level has the atzmi in it, but the difference is how revealed it is. And that's why they have the power to be mevarer. Shem has the power to create birur, even in the lowest of worlds, because it's using this atzmi zdika. The difference is bizgalus atzmi, the vatzilus ubegili ubebiyah atzmi mesalim. And same thing with Torah. There's Torah Atzilus and Torah Debriya. Remember, we learned before that Torah also has this power, the power Machzire Lemutov. Torah has the power to transform even the negative into a positive, but there's also Torah of Atzilus, and there's Torah in Bria and Torah Yetzirah. So wherever you go, there's Torah. So it's the different of the level of the magnitude of how much the Torah is revealed, but they all have an Atzmizdika power within it. It's essentially what he's saying here. So it's important to remember we're talking about atzmi. When you generally talk about helam, you're not talking about atzmi because the etzem can't be concealed. Or let's put it this way, it's not subject to revelation in the first place. So when you talk about, let's say, the regular flow of so goes through tzimtzumim, concealments, goes inside of kalim. Here, we want to make sure that it's retaining an atzmizdika power while also allowing us to exist. So Shema has that power, and that's why it has the power to create the birur that we're talking about. Now, he's going to go back and explain. Remember that Tzaddikim Gemurim do have this power to completely transform the animal soul with this higher earth. Remember, we learned that back when he spoke in the Avodah at the bottom of page. We spoke about Tzaddikim. That was right here. The end of the paragraph on page 1322. Tzaddikim mur ave b'tainugim, that it's so intense from Yechidah Benefesh that it actually transforms the very essence and the very personality of the animal soul. So based on what we're learning now, it would appear that correct to say that the Tzaddikim are able to bring the Shema into their lives. And that's what he's going to discuss now. But it's all going back to, remember, we're talking about a higher power that's sweetening the Gvura, meaning transforming it simply with its pure sheer firepower. Mamayla lamata, from the top down, in a form of mamela. Not through isaskus, not through engagement and through battle, but it just has that power. Like by Matan Torah, there's a revelation that just transformed the mountain and the physical matters of this world. So he's going to say now like this. Let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything. And now, Tzaddikim b'avedosam, Tzaddikim in their aveda, in their service, in their work, mamshichim b'chinas shema sheyeh begili. They draw down that shema should be in a revealed way. No, it's not just in a form of misalim. That's their avodah. Because all this that we're talking about, Shema, is without avodah. Shema has that power, the power of bittul, the power that Chochmah has in Atzilus, like I discussed and explained, Koyach Ma, that's rooted, and in general, the Shema and Atzilus, that's rooted and originates from Metzach of Ak, but now through their avodah, is to reveal the Shema. That is the revelation, the energy and the revelation that they draw down in their work below. When they do their avodah in Ava v'yira, in love and reverence of God, the avodah in davening, in learning, in mitzvahs, in chesed, whatever it may be, they are revealing it. The truth is, it's all of us are doing that. But he wants to talk about the highest level, of course, in this avodah. That's why he's using tzaddikim here. Shari klolis inyan yeridus hanashamas, because the general purpose, or inyan, or the idea, or the concept of the descent of souls, is to draw down and the revelation of the divine below. Commotion is barely ill, like we learned earlier, page 1307 and on. That was the whole section. We began what Tachlis B'rias Adon Lamata is to radiate and illuminate the darkness of the divine being concealed in this world. He's now saying that's the Gili of Shema. That's what means revealing Shema. That process that we learned on 1307 and 1308 and those pages, the purpose of why Neshama comes down is to bring Gili Shema. With Tzaddikim, Shem b'bchinas Ma, and Tzaddikim who are the ultimate level of Ma, that's they embody Shema. We have Shema in our Nefesh Alekis. Everybody, every Adam is Gematria Ma, so every human being has it, but Tzaddikim personify it in the fullest sense of the word. Harihei mamshichin Gili HaShema. Since they're the level of Shema, the level they embody Bittul, that's what they are. The tzaddikim, like we say, the ovis, heinen and merkava. The ovis are a chariot, a vehicle, 24/7. Their whole role is to just express the divine below. So therefore, they're mamshichim gili hashema. They draw down the revelation of Shema. The kafiyah ishtalshalos, because without the avodah of the tzaddikim, according to the regular flow of ishtalshalos, which means the creation process. So we learned, and we've learning all the time, that God created existence with a structure and a hierarchy. So according to ishtalshalos, on its own, Shema, Baba, Levush, Vehelim. So we learned that the Shema, though it's rooted in the Metzach and originates in the forehead with all the atzmi of it, but it comes by Levush, Vehelim, which is like the forehead, the levush and helam of the forehead. Levush vehelim klei aponim va'metzach. In the garment and the concealment of klei aponim, he calls it the face is like a keli. It's the container which that atzmi is piercing of the face and the forehead. Adarach moshel. For example, like we said before. And keep in mind, again, this is not a tzimtzum. It's not a levush and helam in the form of tzimtzum, where it's diminishing it, it's just concealing it, it's just blocking it, so to speak. But the intensity is there, as opposed to when you conceal and you diminish, and then the light becomes a reflection of the light, a reflection of the reflection. So it's not a reflection of it's the atzmi, but there is a curtain, a partition called the forehead. That's correct to say. Partition would be an accurate way of putting it, but not a partition that diminishes it, a partition that simply doesn't let it shine with its full intensity, just like the beads of wine that you see on the other side of the barrel. Okay? The mishum zeh, and why is that the case? Because when God created existence, ishtalshalos, he needed to do that. Because if the atzmi would radiate in full glory, nothing could exist. And due to this fact that the Seder Shtalshel of the Shema comes in a levush vehelim, which is like in this case, like the face and the forehead, klei aponim va'metzach, That's why in the Nevraim you don't have mamash the bitl of shema, which as we see reality, without avodah. We're talking now as it was created. But tzaddikim, and the tzaddikim who embody shema, when they come down below into these worlds where the shema is concealed behind the metzach, mamshichim shema, or that the shema is the gili that comes through the metzach, but it's concealing what's beneath it, beneath the surface. Mamshichim shema begili. They draw down that the shema should be revealed, and that's through their work and their service and their hard work. Biyiridas etzem amahus, meaning not just revealing a divine revelation, that they're actually drawing down. Biyiridas etzem amahus should be beli levush vehester, the klei haponim va'metzach, that it should be without the garment and the concealment of the clay of the vessel or the keli, the container of the face and the forehead. It's like they're opening up the mind, that it shouldn't be. Like essentially, if you're able to see behind the forehead, what's inside the skull, what's behind the face, that's what they do. So if you look in Tanya, before we read on, especially the parentheses, so in Tanya, he says essentially in different words this idea. In chapter 36, in Tanya, he says like this. He says that the purpose of creation is Nesava Kodesh Baruch Hu, Liyaslei is Baruch Dira B'Tachtein, right? Yeah. It should be a Dira B'Tachtein. That's what he says there. So then he says, what means Tachteinim? Tachteinim means that the revelation, not Tachteinim doesn't mean physical space, the lowest level, the lowest floor. It means in the level of concealment of the divine, it's the most concealed. And that's necessary. And now we have Tachteinim, the concealed divine. But the goal is to reveal godliness. So he says, how do we do that? He says through Torah. Ein Eiz ela Torah. Torah gives us the power to reveal the divine in a way that it shouldn't destroy the universe. Because the reason it was concealed was, like he says, that Rizal, that Tzimtzum was in order that existence should be. Even though Tzimtzum is not really the expression here, because Tzimtzum is a true concealment, but for our context here, it works. And that's why you can't have the Gilui Erdei Sofa before the Tzimtzum. But Torah allows us step by step to reveal godliness to the point that when Mashiach comes, after we refine the world, it'll be V'nigla Kved Hashem V'ro Kol Basar Yachdav, as he brings there, that godliness in its full glory will be revealed, and he brings the verse, V'lo Yekonef Oid Meirecha V'hoyenecha Royes Es Meirecha. So let's analyze this verse. There will no longer be a garment, a shirt, a konaf. Lo Yekonef Oid Meirecha. My teacher will no longer be concealed by a garment. V'hoyenecha Royes Es Meirecha. And the eyes, Royes, will see the teacher's face in the full glory without a garment. Now there he doesn't talk about metzach. There you could say garment means a garment on top of the face. But that concept is the same. And then he says, so even before Mashiach comes, before the Geula, me'enze, a taste of it was there by Matan Torah, like we learned in the previous page. What was Matan Torah? They saw godliness. Hashem al Har Sinai. It consumed the mountain, it transformed it, and the whole physical world was changed. So now he's explaining this is what the Aveda, after Matan Torah now comes the Aveda, where we want to draw down this energy, not just temporarily, but permanently, and transform existence. So that's what Tzaddikim do. On its own, Mitzad Shtalshalus, the Shema is there, but it's like behind the curtain or behind the garment of the face and the forehead. And Tzaddikim reveal what is there beneath, behind the keli of the Ponim Va'ametzach. He continues in the parentheses, like we'll be in the future. Like we'll be in the future. The Lo Yekonef Oid Merecha, your teacher, will no longer be concealed by a corner, by a garment. There will no longer be garments that conceal. And then there'll be the revelation of Shema and the creations. There'll be an utter state of sublimation and absorbed and nullification in a positive way of the Ayin Elikiya Atzmi. The bitl of the Ayin Eliki Atzmi, the core, divine, substanceless, if you wish, or shapelessness. So essentially, that's what Tzaddikim do. They draw down the Shema that on its own is concealed, like he says, the etzem that's misalim, through their Aveda. And L'asad Lavi, it'll be in the full sense of the word, fully revealed, and the creation will have been transformed. Now you'll say, what's the key difference? Because Aveda refines existence and allows us to become Kalim. Like I mentioned many times, the student at the beginning can only understand Aleph Beis. And as he grows and the Kalim expand, they can receive more and more Oir. And that's what the Aveda of Tzaddikim accomplish, and the Aveda in general accomplishes. It refines the containers, allows you to draw more energy, and ultimately draw Shema all the way from the highest levels that he's describing here, where the etzem of Shema, the Ayin Atzmi, is all revealed in the Nivraim, and they don't get annihilated or obliterated. So now the Rebbe Rashab continues to qualify. 1 second. How do you explain how this works exactly? How is it possible that Ma, Ha'elyon, this higher level of Ma, should become revealed, should arrive, should be revealed below Klei HaPonim, without the Klei HaPonim? I mean, the whole reason of the structure of the human organism, the same thing in the Shtalshel is the Metzach of Ak, is in order for there to sustain existence. So how is it possible? L'asad Lavei, he says, V'nira, this is a nira, he's saying it in pairs, the L'asad Yiyakach, that's how it will be in the future. Like we just cited. There'll no longer be a garment, and the eyes will see the teacher. But how is it possible that now we should have something like this? Because we're saying that the Aveda that Tzaddikim accomplished this. So it's one thing, also it'll be the end of the Aveda and everything will be elevated and refined in that way. It's interesting, he says, Venira, because clearly the Rebbe Rashab probably did not find it explicit anywhere. But basically, based on the Pasuk, it's clear that they'll have the Shema without a Metzach, without the Keli of the Ponim and the Metzach. It could be, it doesn't say anywhere that. That's why it says Venira. That's my assumption. But that's in the future. What about now? So now he's going to answer that question. How do we accomplish that now? So before I continue, because it's a whole dense topic, anybody want to ask anything so far? So we're right now in the middle of a question. And he's going to answer the Inyan who is going to be the answer. But do you have any questions on what we've learned till here? So Inyan who, the Inyan of this is to explain how do we have it today. That this transmission of Shema that we're discussing does not come in a revealed way, b'chinas ayin haruchni, in that shapeless or seamless or nothingness of spirituality. When I say nothingness, meaning ayin in contrast to yesh. Yesh means there's an identity, there's a personality. Ayin means that our personality gets absorbed in a higher reality. Bittul, basically what we mean by ayin here. So he's saying it's not, but it doesn't come in a revealed way in a form of ayin haruchni. Elam shachasi balamata b'chinas yesh v'dover ma dafke. That the way it's nimshach today, it comes down in a form of a yesh v'dover ma dafke. Interesting how he uses the word dover ma. Dover ma means bittul generally, ma, but here he's saying dover ma, that it has some substance. And he uses ma in a quotation mark. So here we're talking about Shem ma coming down in some form of yesh v'dover ma. Not yesh as an ego, arrogance, God forbid, because this is the avodah. But to say that it's complete nothingness. In other words, as l'asad love, that will be the complete absorption of subject and object, where we become one with the divine, and therefore you don't need a garment, and we can see the face itself without any garment. When they say face here means that's the nida. You see gili atzmi within the metzach and the panim. He says, but today it still comes in a form of yesh v'dover ma dafke. Shehu iyin gili b'chinas ayin umma b'chinas yesh l'mato. Kameshu b'chinas ayin l'mayla b'shava mamish. Okay. So let me explain what he's saying here. Let me first translate this last line. So we're talking about not complete ayin. We're talking about the ayin coming in a form. They say the lamata below the footnote, the publisher of this said the lamata should say lamaila. I'm looking and wondering whether I agree. Maybe, maybe not. Probably correct. Lamaila b'shava mamish. So here's what he's saying. Just, I know it's very cryptic. It seems like contradiction of terms. Is it ayin or yesh? Which one is it? So let me explain it in a little more slowly in Baal Batisha terms. It's always good to begin with a point of reference, which is ourselves. We always begin with the yesh. You wake up in the morning, the first thing is you feel yourself. You're hungry, you're tired, you're nervous, you're calm, whatever it may be. It's only when you contemplate, then you say, okay, it's time to say Moida Ani. Lefonecha. Moida Ani, I acknowledge to you, returning my soul to me. You say you wash negelvasser. You say your brachas. Whatever the regimen a person does. But it's all centered that the first thing we feel is the yesh. In the language of Chassidus, first is elam is b'pshitis and lakuz b'yischachus. What's pashut, without a question, is what you feel, and you feel yourself. What you need is that what the novelty is when it says in Shulchan Aruch, this is what you're supposed to do. The truth is, in reality, godliness should be first, and existence comes second. But we don't feel it that way because the Tzimtzum Arishin reversed. It's like turn the glove inside out. So the hand is the primary thing, and the glove is only a garment for the hand. But imagine thinking that the garment is the ikr and the hand is the tof. That the peel is more important than the fruit within. That's the world as we know it, without any avodah. And that's how God wanted it to be. He created it that way. That means tachteinim. That even though reality and the truth of everything is godliness, I go back to page 1307, where the Rebbe Rashab eloquently explained it in detail, that in truth everything is really the divine energy. But no, what we see is the surface. Imagine coming to the conclusion that subatomic energy or atoms and molecules are secondary. The main thing is the outer surface. It's not the case. The outer surface is just an expression of the inner energy. So we begin with a yesh. Aveda sa'adam means the work of a person is to start sublimating and slowly coming to awareness that it's not all about you. There's more going on. There's a God that created you. Nothing creates itself. If you remember the contemplation he spoke about on page 1309 and on, you start contemplating, 1 second, the yesh did not create itself. We're sustained, we're blessed with life. And this contemplation continues to grow to the point you come to realize not only is the yesh not the main thing, but is the ayin that gives me life, the ayin alaki, the divine energy, but that's the ikr and the yesh is the tof. That's the reality and we are the novelty. But that's a long process of Aveda. I mean, long in time, in Aveda and equality, but that takes work. So we begin with the yesh. And the ultimate goal is that the yesh becomes so acclimated to godliness that it becomes completely absorbed. But as long as it doesn't, the yesh will be annihilated if there's too much of a gilui which is like he says in Shar Yechid V'Amuna, Ilu nitn la'ayin liris, if the eye was given permission, ilu nitn reshus la'ayin liris, the eye was given permission to see the divine energy that sustains us, we would all be annihilated, we'd all be eliminated. Just like you'd be burned up by the light. The light would be too powerful. It would completely zap us into oblivion. So for existence to be, we need to have a sense of, we need the concealment to allow the yesh to be. But that's not where it's meant to be, remain there. The goal is to turn the yesh into an ayin. It says actually in Chassidus, that Tzaddikim and Ma'aser Shemayim v'Aretz, that the work of Tzaddikim is greater than the work of God in creating heaven, and God created from ayin yesh. And Tzaddikim, through their avodah, make from yesh ayin, which is even greater, because God created this yesh. So they turn the yesh into ayin. Sometimes it says that the whole kavanah is to turn from ani to ayin. Moida ani, the me, the self, should become ayin, completely sublimated and dedicated to something greater than ourselves. But there are steps in this. You can't just jump from yesh to ayin. La'asid love, after thousands of years of work and refinement and tzaddikus, I should add, and all the difficulties, which also was part of the refinement that transformed this material world, we will come to a level of total ayin. The ayin eliki that he's talking about with the Shema will be completely revealed. The atzmi, that's within the Shema, that's mavar, the ban, the yesh of ban, of the behema, will be completely revealed. But today what he's saying is that we won't have complete ayin. The ayin will still be part of the yesh. In other words, we're not completely eliminating the yesh yet. That only happens l'asud love. That's what he says. So in other words, you can't, it's not like completely the face and the forehead will disappear. He says that it'll become begili, not ayin aruchni, but it'll come in the yesh. So he says, the gili of ayin will permeate the yesh, but not to the point that the yesh disappears. And that's what he says, and that's what it means. So there's a level that where it doesn't yet, the yesh does not yet come completely transformed into ayin, but the ayin is radiating through it, and that's the avodah today that we can accomplish. And he's going to give an example for it. Where do we see an example that something is a yesh, but it's in a state of ayin, not ayin completely, complete bittul, that there's nothing there, but it exists, but it's in a state of ayin. He's going to give the example of an entity that we've learned about a number of times already, the man, lechem min hashamayim, the man, which is called on the name ma. They said, what is this? Mozeh. That's why it's called man. Man is from the word ma. So he says, V'adugma lezeh hu haman. Is the man, the lechem min hashamayim, the bread, the manna that fell from heaven. So it was a yesh. It was not invisible. It was not intangible. It was something that had color, had substance. However, the kamoisha balamato yemezena the chuchma samamish. So on one hand, it was actual food, but it was a manifestation of something ruchni. It was a ruchni that became gashmi. So the way it came down below, it was mamish mezena de chuchma samamish. That's the language from Zohar. We learned it earlier in volume 2. A food that came from chuchma, from chachma ilah, from chachma vatzilus. Uksiv vayikra say man ki lo yadu mahu. They called it man because they didn't know what it was. It was a mysterious food. When the dew fell in the morning, together with it was these like this man. Sometimes it's called tala de bedulcha, like crystal dew. But since they didn't know what it was, why? Because it was a mystery, because it wasn't a regular yesh. Food, bread from earth, is clearly, it grows from the grain, and we harvest the grain, and then we thresh it, and we turn it into flour, and mix it with water, and we bake bread. And we eat it, and we digest it, and there's waste. This was a mysterious food. You ate it, it had every taste you wanted. There was no waste. So it was clearly in the form of a yesh, but it was an ayin that manifested in, like masquerading, if you wish. I don't want to say masquerade, camouflaged in the form of a yesh. Hainu, sheim b'chinas lo yoda v'lo yisyada. B'chinas gimel rishein is the atik. What does it mean they didn't know what it was? So on a gashmizdika level, it was mysterious. On a ruch, what does it mean in Shadish? It came from the level that's called an atik, the three higher levels of atik. Remember, atik is this highest level we're talking about. Lo yoda v'lo yisyada. So the expression reisha de lo yisyada, rad lo, is the acronym. The head, the lo yisyada, that's unknown. But the full expression is lo yoda, it doesn't know, and it's not known. Why? Because it defies knowledge. It defies definition. So it's a level that we call the super conscious, that it's not manifest in anything that's knowable. So to say it's not existent, no, absolutely not. It exists, but it's an extent lo yoda. That's why this man came from that level, but it came in a form that you could. There's not pure ayin. It came in a yesh. They were able to put it into their mouths. They ate it. It sustained them, and it had certain features that were similar to food. As was explained earlier, Dibra Maskul Roshi Amatis Hadalad. The fourth mimer in this discourse, in this Hemshech, Ayin Beis, called Roshi Amatis. They give us the page 1070 and on. This was discussed at length in volume 2. And that's why the man did not have waste, and did not have measure. As this written is discussed there in the mimer called Ela Hadvarim. What means no measure? Because if someone took more than they needed, it didn't work. So on one hand, they each had their allocation, but as explained there, it was a measure that had no measure, basically. And yet, it did come down below in Atzir. It had the image and the shape of a physical food. And they grounded it in a grinder. And they cooked it. In other words, they processed it. It wasn't just so it was subject to certain features that are like regular food. What is this strange level that on one hand it's a yesh, on the other hand it's this mysterious entity? So he says, "V'hu sha'ayin eliki ba b'chinas yesh." That the ayin eliki came in a form of a yesh. So it was really essentially an ayin eliki, a divine entity, but that has no substance, that has no complete bittul. But it came in the form of a yesh. And not only in the form of yesh, it was equal, just like ayin itself, that doesn't come in a yesh. So the ayin, as it is on its own, manifested in the yesh, like you said before, b'shava mamish. I'm going to stop here. In the parentheses, he's going to qualify. There's still a difference, he says, between how the man was above and how it came down below. But we'll learn that tomorrow. But I'm going to stop here. It's not finished. The subject is still continuing. But all this is coming to explain what we learned before. The second level of Hamtokas Agvur is that the chesed, or this what he's speaking now, the ayin, transforms the yesh, but it does not become ois yesh. It's still a yesh, but the yesh is now in a state of ayin, but it's all from a mile lamata, from the top down, not from within the yesh itself, which is going to be the third level, which we'll learn in the next page. I'm going to stop here, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Anybody? Nothing? Okay. Okay, well, as I said, tomorrow we'll continue He's going to continue and develop this, the whole picture, which will lead us then to the third level. Okay, so I'll stop here, halfway down, a little more than halfway down.